The night of October 1st, 2077 was unlike any other for the people of Welch, West Virginia. What began as a faint rumbling beneath their feet erupted into a surge of giant green crystals, tearing through the earth and shattering the small mountain town. At the time, no one knew what caused the disaster. 28 years later, we know the truth. I'm the Irresolute Cartographer, and this is the story of those responsible for the destruction of Welch. This is the story of Project Vulcan. The story of Project Vulcan begins with Atomic Mining Services. Alongside Garahan Mining and Hornwright Industrial, AMS was the newest of the major mining corporations in Appalachia, each bringing a unique philosophy to the field. Garahan focused on improving the efficiency of human miners. Hornwright sought to replace them entirely with its auto miners. AMS mined with nuclear weapons. After drilling a shaft deep into the earth, the company would lower a nuclear device to the bottom, detonate it, and use the blast to shatter the surrounding rock, exposing veins of valuable ore. While this was obviously a risky prospect that was dangerous for their human miners, the company was hard at work replacing those miners with Hornwright's auto miners. Despite these cost-cutting measures, the budget was stretched tight on these projects, until AMS found something unexpected in one of their mines: glowing green crystals. The company named these crystals Ultracite, and the material proved itself to be an incredibly potent energy source, providing much more power than comparable materials. AMS was thrilled. Not only had they discovered the next great thing in energy, they had a stranglehold on the market. There was only one problem. They didn't know how to make Ultracite. They only knew that it showed up after some of their detonations. To brute force the creation of more Ultracite, they expanded their operations, adding more drop sites across the Cranberry Bog. They even added one in the industrially destroyed region of Appalachia, colorfully known as the Ash Heap. The depths of that particular site, southeast of Welch, were accessible through an aging AMS coal mine, one that was nearly depleted. After 11 test detonations that didn't produce any detectable Ultracite, they were ready to close up shop. That's when a buyer emerged to take the mine off their hands: Raven Financial Holdings, LLC. The sale was a rapid affair. The workers were told to report at 4 p.m. for reassignment to new positions in Welch. By midnight that very night, the control of the mine transferred to Raven Financial Holdings, LLC. The moment the transfer was complete, an emergency evacuation order went out. Any workers still on site were told to leave immediately under threat of death. Personal belongings still in the mine were forfeit, and no compensation for them would be provided. Soon, new personnel arrived, the true masters of Raven Financial Holdings, the Enclave. Yes, the Enclave, the embodiment of the military-industrial complex, the shadow government that ruled the country behind the curtain, had taken possession of a nearly depleted radioactive coal mine in Appalachia. The site was to become a research facility, but it would take time to build. As construction commenced, the work was guarded by security officers under Captain John Holloway. A veteran of other Enclave actions, Captain Holloway was well versed in the nature of these operations. His primary orders were to maintain the strictest possible security. The locals were not to know of the existence of the lab. Any intruders would be shot on sight. While the workers under his aegis excavated new chambers and constructed the facility, they were also installing security equipment, including the massive EN-06 Guardian to protect the site from exterior infiltration and assault. The captain, on the other hand, suspected that the true threat would come from within. Enclave scientists were brilliant and arrogant. They viewed themselves as gods among men, and their creations often reflected that hubris. Machines and mutants that defied all restraint. However, in this case, upper management of the Enclave had seen fit to give the captain and his team control of the situation. If those scientists went too far, he would deal with them. As the lab's construction neared its end, those scientists arrived. The scientists that came were an odd group. A mix of both Enclave scientists and civilians that were teaming up with the Enclave to make their work possible. At the head of the Enclave science team was Dr. Esther Wright. The civilians were led by Robert Gaines, PhD. Together, they would be performing the work to unlock the secrets of Ultracite, or, as they called it, Project Vulcan. Given the nature of their work, one might question why the Enclave chose one of Atomic Mining Services' failed detonation sites for their testing ground. The answer lies beneath the old mine. Though AMS had pioneered the use of nuclear explosives in mining, and had even discovered Ultracite, they never truly understood how it formed. Worse, they were terrible at detecting it. Beneath the shaft they abandoned lay a massive chamber filled with enormous quantities of Ultracite. Not only were there Ultracite crystals, but an actual lake of the glowing green material. As an aside, I can't say with certainty what the liquid was, but it appears to be a molten form of Ultracite, the result of too much material compressed into too small a space. Like a nuclear reactor operating without control rods, the crystals may have induced a runaway reaction, generating intense heat until the surrounding rock itself melted. Whatever its true nature, this lake of Ultracite became the heart of Project Vulcan. To Dr. Robert Gaines, it was a marvel, a perfect fusion of natural wonder and human achievement he called the Gleaming Depths. The project's name was chosen deliberately, Vulcan. the Roman god of fire, of metal, of creation through heat and flame. The scientists hoped to unlock the secrets of Ultracite, to learn how it formed, how it grew, and what other forces it might conceal beyond power generation. The first step was clear. They had to reproduce Ultracite growth under controlled conditions. The science team was split on the best way to achieve this. Dr. Gaines, leading the civilian scientists, believed radiation was the key. After all, Ultracite had first appeared after AMS's nuclear detonations. Dr. Esther Wright, his Enclave counterpart, disagreed. She believed that sound waves were the key to stimulate their growth. Though Dr. Wright believed that science was on her side, because of her abrasive attitude, Dr. Gaines was by far the more popular between the two of them. She feared that if she were to attempt to overrule him, there would be a revolt. Though she lamented the potential death of the project before it even got off the ground, she focused her efforts on sonic wave manipulation and made a breakthrough. She managed to cause Ultracite crystals to grow with nothing but sound. This achievement secured her position as the lead scientist in Project Vulcan. What she would discover next would be even more amazing. Something she would call Ultragenic resonance. While one frequency stimulated the growth of more crystal, other frequencies could stimulate previously generated crystal to produce different effects. Effects Dr. Wright referred to as Ultragenic. The most promising effect discovered was a sort of sonic force field that protected the crystal and nearby objects from trauma. The military potential was obvious, and even the project base benefited from this development. EN06, the guardian for the facility, was augmented with shielding technology, making it virtually invulnerable. The only weak point was that if the crystals themselves were physically damaged, it would result in damage to the objects shielded by the crystals. This impressive innovation caught the attention of Enclave management. Secretary of Agriculture Thomas Eckhart, secretly a member of the Enclave, decided to reward the program with additional security. This security came in the form of Enclave Special Operations soldiers, Enclave Squad Epsilon. These 5 men and women were among the best of what the Enclave had to offer. With the facility complete, and with supplies and equipment that could last decades without resupply, it was time to disappear. The tunnels connecting the project to the outside world were collapsed, locking the scientists and soldiers inside until their work was complete. This was definitively proven to be the right move when the lab performed an action that would have surely resulted in their exposure otherwise. Whether through ambition or error, the team initiated a resonance that caused Ultracite crystals to propagate rapidly outward. The growth surged towards the nearby town of Welch, and on the night of October 1st, they broke the surface. Fortunately for the Enclave, credit for the devastation they unleashed upon Welch was quickly claimed by another. When news spread that Ultracite had burst forth from the ground, Atomic Mining Services wasted no time stepping forward to claim ownership of the mineral wealth. The company declared the crystals to be their property, the result of their own earlier detonations. Shortly, AMS representatives in Welch began attempting to evict residents from their homes under the guise of enforcing mineral rights. It was a breathtaking display of arrogance and insensitivity, and the response was immediate and violent. Clashes erupted across town, then spread outward through southern Appalachia. For 10 days, the region descended into chaos. The damage to Hornwright Industrial's property alone was estimated to be in the tens of millions, not to mention the damage to every other site across the region. When it all finally wound down on October 12th, the blame for the unrest fell squarely on AMS. Behind closed doors, AMS executives privately admitted they had no idea what actually caused the eruption, nor why their own instruments had failed to detect Ultracite beneath the mine they sold to Raven LLC. It was a mystery they would never solve. 11 days later, on Saturday, October 23rd, 2077, the bombs came down. Atomic Mining Services, and the old world of which it was a part, ceased to exist. Though Project Vulcan had been unaware of the damage they caused to Welch, their sensors did pick up the seismic activity that marked the end of the world. In the tumult that came with the war, the facility lost contact with both the White Spring Bunker and Raven Rock, the Enclave's closest command centers, connections they would one day have to reestablish. Along with this, Epsilon Squad began searching for a route back to the surface. Meanwhile, the work with Ultracite would continue. Their research was now more important than ever to the Enclave and the world they would build in the aftermath of the bombs. Despite their best efforts, they failed to restore their communications and to reach the surface on their own. For the next near 8 years of operation, they would be out of contact with their brethren. As the 2070s turned to the 2080s, issues began to emerge with the Ultragenic crystals. When life forms were exposed to the crystals for too long, they developed side effects similar to radiation poisoning, but also agitation and aggression. To this disturbing mix was added the fact that some of these creatures seemed to carry the effects of Ultragenic shielding with them for a time. Monstrous, aggressive creatures with shielding against attack were a dangerous mix. Luckily, the walls of the lab were resistant to such effects, and thus the staff was safe, but the creatures they were encountering were getting more and more dangerous. This ended up being the end of Dr. Gaines. On July 31st, 2080, during a test involving ultragenic frequencies in a caged animal, the subject broke free. It mauled Dr. Robert Gaines to death. The popular scientist was mourned by many of the staff. Even Captain Holloway, who had long distrusted the researchers, mourned his passing. Dr. Wright, on the other hand, was practically giddy at the news. She noted glibly that she hoped that they find the saboteurs soon. Despite the appearance of foul play in Dr. Gaines's death, no investigation was ever conducted, and Dr. Wright was made lead scientist not long after. For the next 4.5 years, the project continued its work on ultragenic frequencies. Then in the spring of 2085, sensors began to detect human, or at least human-sized beings moving around nearby. Investigating this occurrence would lead to the rapid collapse of Project Vulcan. On April 23, 2085, a two-man patrol from Epsilon Squad, callsigns Wasp and Python, encountered the first outside threat seen since the bombs fell. Though they easily dispatched these beings, red humanoids with green crystalline growths jutting from their skin, they figured there would be more. 1 week later, on April 30, 2080, Wasp and Python suddenly and inexplicably assaulted a superior officer. Once they'd been dispatched by a security turret, an autopsy revealed that they were likely under the effect of some disease from the outside. By June 7, 2085, all three of the remaining members of Epsilon Squad, Lynx, Bloodhound, and Vulture, had also fallen ill. Rather than succumb to the disease and attack their fellows, these three chose quarantine and stasis to allow the researchers to study them. The disease that had taken Epsilon Squad from Project Vulcan would eventually be known to the outside world as the Scorched Plague, and the humanoids encountered as the Scorched. In a cruel twist of fate, the plague had originated in another Enclave experiment conducted in another AMS mine beneath the cranberry bog near Watoga. The reason it was able to spread freely was none other than Secretary Thomas Eckhart, the very man who had assigned Epsilon Squad to Project Vulcan. Over the next few weeks, despite negative test results for Scorched Plague infection, there were disturbances amongst the staff. Even with a crackdown on discipline, by late July these disturbances were getting worse. People were reporting headaches, dizziness, and violent outbursts. By August, the problem was reaching a critical mass. Through the first weeks of August 2085, whatever was afflicting the Vulcan staff reached new and terrifying heights. Panic spread through the halls. Arguments turned violent. In a few horrifying cases, cannibalism was reported. In response, Captain Holloway declared martial law within the facility. As order continued to unravel, the scientists began to suspect the source of the madness: ultragenic crystals. The same radiation-like influence that had driven animals berserk was now affecting the humans who had studied it for years. Desperate to restore control, Holloway had Dr. Esther Wright arrested and placed on trial before a tribunal. For her part, Dr. Wright blamed Dr. Gaines, her 5 years deceased and still far more popular rival, for her fall from grace. In her mind, the problems experienced in the base were mere setbacks, and the staff, gutless traitors. On August 24, 2085, Dr. Wright was found guilty and summarily executed. Unfortunately, the staff was too far gone. Riots began among the remaining staff, and by August 30th, the base had fallen. For the next 20 years, the ruins of Project Vulcan remained sealed and silent, buried beneath the earth until the arrival of dwellers from Vault 76, who would uncover the last traces of the Enclave's forgotten experiment. After digging into the old AMS mine, the Vault dwellers encountered EN-06, the grand defender of Project Vulcan in the time before it was sealed from the surface. After a contentious fight against the Ultragenic shielded sentry bot, the Vault dwellers stood victorious and were ready to advance into the mine. Once they were past this first guardian, they encountered a room with a large drilling machine and no other way to advance. In pressing the button to activate the drill, they discovered that not only was the drill not fueled, attempting to activate it attracted a swarm of angry mole miners. Battling the mole miners and their mole rat brethren, the Vault dwellers managed to fuel the drill. Disturbingly, they also encountered a few ultragenic mole miners. Invulnerable to attack, the Vault dwellers had to flee these creatures when encountered. Once the borer's fuel tanks were full, it spun away, digging deeper into the facility. Following the trail of the drill, the Vault dwellers found a security section of the lab, followed by a room where the scientists were studying the Scorched Plague infected members of Epsilon Squad. These three were the last living parts of the project, if one can really count their status as living. To advance through the facility, the Vault dwellers found they had to destroy a series of generators. In doing this, they inadvertently activated a security system that revived the last three members of Epsilon Squad. In preventing the bunker from automatically repairing the generators while fighting off Lynx, Bloodhound, and Vulture, they cleared the way forward. The Vault dwellers came next to the office of the chief scientist and the room in which Dr. Gaines died. Amongst the ruins, they discovered both a shattered terrarium tank with a name tag that read Butch, and a note that related that Butch was Dr. Gaines' favorite pet. It seemed that Butch was some form of highly venomous snake that had escaped its tank in an inexplicable manner and disappeared into the walls. While this was obviously concerning, it had been decades since the lab was last in operation. Surely the snake had perished in the caves by now? Regardless, the Vault dwellers soon arrived in a large chamber filled with ultragenic crystals and containment cells for animals. Upon activating a console, the room began to fill with ultragenic mole miners and other creatures. Luckily, the vault dwellers had been taking in every bit of information they could find in the vault, and thus they had heard Dr. Esther Wright's musings on ultragenic shielding, including the fact that it could be a hazard to the shielded object if the crystals providing the property were destroyed. Luring the ultragenic mole miners and their brethren through the chamber, the vault dwellers shattered crystal after crystal as soon as the creatures were in range of the hazardous effect. Luckily, they managed to end this battle shortly after the emergence of Ultragenic Deathclaws, an incredible menace. With the way forward cleared once more, the vault dwellers emerged into a decontamination chamber, and beyond, the Gleaming Depths, as Dr. Gaines called it, the lake of Ultracite at the heart of the complex. Investigating the area, they discovered to their dismay that Dr. Gaines's pet Butch was, in fact, not dead. The now enormous hooded cobra emerged from the lake of Ultracite and began to attack. Avoiding its venomous attacks and dealing damage of their own, the vault dwellers managed to vanquish this Ultracite terror. With the creature dead and the mystery of Project Vulcan solved, the vault dwellers returned to the comparably welcome wasteland outside. Alright, that should do it for the narrative, but I have a few more notes before we close things out. First, I want to note that not all of the order of events was strictly from the raw lore. I had to do some reasoning. Let me give you some examples. A. Project Vulcan was responsible for the destruction of Welch. It's not confirmed, but they were literally creating more Ultracite via sonic frequency. This is the only known incident in which Ultracite suddenly burst forth from the ground pre-war, and it happened a short distance from the lab. B. Project Vulcan was sealed before the destruction of Welch. They had no record of the event that we can find. They wouldn't even have known that the world had ended 11 days later, except for the fact that they felt the shaking unleashed by the bombs and lost contact with the congressional bunker in Raven Rock. To be clear, they never observed either event directly. C. Epsilon Squad was a reward for the discovery of ultragenic shielding. It's clear to me that Epsilon Squad was not there in the opening stages of the project. They would have been mentioned by Captain Holloway, who instead only mentioned EN06. Along with this, we know that they got into the bunker before it was sealed, as after the bombs, they were conducting sorties to find their way out. The project was only active a few months before the bombs, so there's a narrow window in which they could have arrived. Second, I have to wonder how many more Gleaming Depths there are in Appalachia. If AMS didn't detect a literal lake of ultracite beneath them, the odds are good that there are more of these chambers. Third, I have to wonder what a motherlode drill is doing here. The motherlode was a proprietary product of Hornwright Industrial that effectively swam through the earth hunting for ore veins. I have a hard time believing that Daniel Hornwright would have leased one out to AMS. We can perhaps assume that it's simply a drill with a similar chassis, maybe an early version of the motherlode. Fourth, the last recording of Captain Holloway is a bit odd. In it, he notes that the science team has gone too far, something he was supposed to prevent according to his first recording. Maybe we have to assume that after the invention of ultragenic shielding that the science team was given more leeway by Secretary Eckhart. Along with this though, he says, the Epsilons were called in, that means extermination mode, but the Epsilons had to have been in the facility since before it was sealed, and by the time everything was really falling apart, the Epsilons were out of commission. I have to assume that perhaps he had some mental issues of his own by that point due to the ultragenic crystals. Fifth, I saw a contention on the Fallout wiki that Dr. Gaines was killed by his pet snake Butch. I do not agree with this contention, as it seems clear to me that his death took place just outside this large cage that could in no way hold Butch before his transformation nor after. Butch lived in his terrarium and escaped to become the Ultracite Terror. Dr. Gaines was killed by a large creature he had enraged within a cage that had been tampered with by Dr. Wright. Sixth, I never really considered how widespread the underground network of scorched tunnels are in Appalachia until this. It's obvious when you consider that fissure sites across the region are access points to this network, but the deaths of Epsilon Squad are some of the earliest recorded as caused by the Scorched Plague, and they were made possible by the early Scorched moving through subterranean passages. Lastly, this content introduces a small inconsistency into the story of the White Spring Enclave. If events unfolded as I've laid them out here, then Secretary Thomas Eckhart would have had access to the technology required to both grow ultracite and produce ultragenic shielding, yet he did neither. To restate the issue briefly, the EN06 Guardian was upgraded with ultragenic shielding, a task that logically would have only been completed before the tunnels leading out of Project Vulcan were deliberately collapsed. Further, after the Great War, the chamber containing EN06 was cut off from the rest of the facility, making such a modification impossible. This means that the shielding upgrade and therefore the underlying discovery logically had to occur prior to the facility being sealed, and if not then before the Great War at the latest. If Eckhart was aware of this development, it raises a simple question. Why didn't he use it? Ultracite growth alone would have given him an enormous advantage in power generation, and Ultragenic shielding would have been a revolutionary upgrade to his forces. One explanation is that Project Vulcan's data was never fully transmitted. The team may have reported their success, but kept their research localized, intending to refine it before sharing the results. With communication lines severed during the war, Eckhart likely assumed the facility had been destroyed and everybody in it was dead. Another possibility is that the technology to pursue either innovation was too proprietary, relying on unique hardware or acoustic systems only available at Vulcan. Without access to that equipment, the White Spring branch simply couldn't replicate the process. None of these explanations are perfect, but I don't have one that is. Between bureaucratic secrecy, limited communication, and Eckhart's obsessive focus on his nuclear program, it's easy to imagine how a discovery of this magnitude could have been lost, buried away with the facility itself. Anyway, that's enough notes, let's close things out. I was initially skeptical about the necessity for yet another Enclave bunker in Appalachia. I've stated on multiple occasions that I fear that with a restricted map that there's a tendency to discover more and more subterranean layers. However, I've come to the conclusion that Project Vulcan is a welcome addition to the story of the region. It helps to explain the ruination of Welch and shows that the Enclave was both aware of Ultracite and working hard to make it part of their arsenal. This was a great way to tie up a couple of loose ends in the lore here. But the story of Project Vulcan is something more. It's the same story we've seen time and again of mankind playing God and paying the price for it, yet here, the sin runs even deeper. Ultracite itself is an affront to the natural order, a byproduct of insatiable greed. In the Vulcan lab, the Enclave pushed that insanity further still. In the end, they weren't just experimenting with this physical representation of corruption, they were corrupted by it. Their search for a means to control this material resulted in them killing and eating each other, not in hunger, but in madness. Alright, I think that'll do it for this video. Follow me on X for lore video announcements at Gaming with Maps. My Discord is open to the public, there's a link in the channel's banner. I stream every Friday evening on YouTube, come check it out if you're interested. I'm now a G Fuel affiliate. Use my G Fuel code iCartographer at checkout to get a discount and to support the channel. If you appreciate what I do here and want to financially support the channel directly, you can become a member on YouTube or a patron with Patreon. I want to thank my channel members and patrons, Mesothelioma, 76 of Texas, Dark Malcontent, Real76, Samsung Smart Fridge, Night Spearhead, Electric Head, Hero Cunning, Laced Cake, Oz Born and Bred 73, Play, Prince Julius, and Doc Vanguard Voyager for their support. I want to thank Prince Julius, Ex-Mutanty, and Nikki the Cat for helping me collect footage in the Gleaming Depths. I also want to specifically thank Dark Malcontent for helping with this video's script. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.